Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do rise in opposition, and not because I don't have sympathy for civil rights and ensuring that all Californians are treated fairly under the law. I've gotten up on this floor actually many times and talked about that need. And it's not lost on me that during COVID, when a lot of civil rights were being undermined, your side was deafeningly silent and did very little to push back. Well, you did nothing to push back against a governor who told us we couldn't even go to church. And by the way, what we opposed was mask mandates, requiring 2-year-olds to wear masks in school, when we found out later that there was no scientific basis for doing so. But you guys said nothing. So excuse me if I just don't find a whole lot of moral clarity on your side when it comes to this issue. But here's the real clear thing that needs to be made. This bill, and if it becomes a law, would have no application to federal law enforcement officers. So all the talk about federal law enforcement officers, your bill can do nothing about them because we only have control over state jurisdiction. And you know that. But just for a moment, let's talk about those federal law enforcement officers who this bill doesn't apply to. They're doing their jobs. Their job is to enforce federal law. And under state law that you all passed and you all support, because you keep talking about how this builds trust in communities, under sanctuary state law, our local law enforcement can't even cooperate with them. So what are you to do when your job is to enforce federal immigration law and you can get no support from local law enforcement? Well, you have to do sweeps. You have to do informed sweeps. And I get that I get that there are real problems. I haven't seen the same kind of issues that I know my colleagues have seen, and I respect that. I listen to that. I hear that. However, when the policy is that they cannot cooperate with local law enforcement, this is what ends up happening. And I'll use just one example. By the way, this has all gone up to the highest court in the land, in the Supreme Court, and they have found that these actions were constitutional. You might not like that decision. That's fine. But the highest court in the land found that the way they're enforcing law is constitutional. And the example was here in Sacramento, when there was a raid at a Home Depot. That's true. But what is also true is they also had warrants, and they also had done background checks to see that many of these people were criminals, were in fact criminals, had criminal records, and that's who they picked up. But what did the news say the next day? A U.S. citizen was picked up. Actually, a U.S. citizen was picked up. That's true. But that U.S. citizen was trying to impede law enforcement officers and slashed ICE car tires as they were just doing their jobs. That is happening too. Here's what also is happening. Federal law enforcement officers getting doxxed and having real violent threats against them. Brutality against ICE agents is up exponentially, 1,000%. And so, yeah, that's why they have to wear masks, because that is a very real threat to our law enforcement. But it doesn't even apply to them, and you know that. And you actually exempted state law enforcement from the bill, so it doesn't apply to them. So methinks it's not really about that, is it? It's
30
about
seconds.
A symbolic measure, but unfortunately, it only applies to local law enforcement, the people who are stuck in the middle between your crappy policy that doesn't allow them to cooperate with federal officers, and they may have to be part of some kind of operation. Maybe, for instance, Net 5, going against drug cartels. Maybe, for instance, going after some of these terrible organizations that are peddling fentanyl into our communities. They might have to go do this, and then they run afoul of your law that you're going to pass. And you're going to take away qualified immunity that we've given to every law enforcement officer so they can feel safe doing their job.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.
You're impeding their job.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.
Vote no.